Welcome. I'm Stephen Howard. I'm an award-winning author and a leadership coach, and my main focus is turning good managers into great leaders. In this YouTube video channel, I'm going to share with you a range of tips and techniques for doing just that, how to become a great leader. And we'll focus on things like how to make better decisions, how to increase employee engagement, and most importantly, how to develop yourself into a great leader. But in this video, let's have some fun. I'm going to share with you some fun and fascinating myths and facts about the brain, some of which may probably surprise you. So for fun, and so that you won't have the same brain myths as I've had all these years, let me share with you some of the brain myths and facts I discovered during the research for my book, Better Decisions, Better Thinking, Better Outcomes. And first, and this is probably the most widely held myth about the brain, is the belief that we use only 10% of our brains. Now, don't feel too bad if this is something you think is true, as research shows that roughly 65% of all Americans also believe this myth. The fact is, we use almost all of our brains almost all the time, though not all of our brain all the time. Research has yet to find an area of the brain that is completely inactive, even in teenagers. Even studies that have measured activity at the single neuron level have not revealed any inactive areas of the brain. Modern scanning technology shows that we use most of our brains most of the time, even when we're asleep. Of course, not every part of the brain is constantly firing all the time. And that's good, for such constant brain activity would likely overheat the brain and cause massive damage. Now, speaking of widely held myths, I was taught in high school that our brains stop growing somewhere around the age of 25. This is definitely not true. Scientists now know that our brains continue to grow and develop well into our 70s, and probably beyond. There's just not enough 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds around to observe and to test. This process of continuous brain cell growth is known as neuroplasticity. So the good news is our brains will continue to grow as we age. The bad news is that many of our lifestyle habits, poor sleeping patterns, being overweight, poor dietary habits, too much constant stress, all these are causing our brains to grow slower and to slow down. The third myth that I came across in my research is the concept that some of us are right-brained and some of us are left-brained. Again, this is not true. Almost all brain functions require the interactions and the interconnectivity of both brain hemispheres. For instance, the ability to understand language occurs in the left hemisphere, while the other aspects of language processing, such as interpretation, rhythm, word stress, they happen in the right hemisphere. Now, for those of you who are parents and teachers, you probably think that most teenagers are brain dead. Well, not quite. But our brains do not fully mature until around the age of 25. But remember, they continue to grow after that. Also, our brains mature from back to front, which means that the prefrontal cortex, the home of judgment, problem solving, decision making, organized thinking, it's the last region of the brain to develop. So it's little wonder that teenagers make so many poor decisions, since the prefrontal cortex of their brain still has 7 to 12 more years of development growth before reaching full maturity. And since the amygdala, which is the emotional control center of our brain, is at the back of our brains and thus develops well before the prefrontal cortex, this helps to explain why teenagers tend to make decisions based on emotions instead of more rational factors. This is also why, as adults, when we get emotionally hijacked, meaning that the amygdala is preventing the prefrontal cortex from making rational decisions, we are effectively thinking like teenagers. Now that's a scary thought. Let's move on to two more facts about our brains. The first is one that almost all of us face, and that's information overload. Multiple studies have shown that very high levels of smartphone and internet use is not good for our brains. It's not just the amount of information that's swamping our brains, which is causing our short-term and long-term memories to be overloaded. It's also the fact that constant access to information from electronic devices prevents our brains from pausing long enough to catch a breath and refresh. There's even a syndrome now known as Google brain, which is caused by constantly searching for more information, which simply exhausts the brain, erodes deep thinking, and saps mental energy. Without a doubt, our brains need regular short breaks from screen time and the buzzing of alert notifications. And the last, and perhaps the scariest brain fact I want to share with you in this video, is the impact of sleep deprivation on brain health and our cognitive powers. Repeated studies have shown that after 17 to 19 hours without sleep, our mental functioning and response speeds are at the equivalent of a blood alcohol content of 0.05. Now that's the legal limit for driving in Europe and Australia, though in the US the blood alcohol content limit is higher at 0.08. But here's the kicker, or the killer, for those of you working double shifts and going extended hours without sleep. After 24 hours of no sleep, our brain's performance measurements are equivalent to a blood alcohol content of 0.10, which is well beyond the maximum level allowed to operate a vehicle. This research shocked me, especially because when I used to live in Asia, and I don't sleep on airplanes, I'd fly from Southeast Asia up to Japan, across the Pacific, land in California, get in a car, and drive about 3 hours to where my parents live. So I'd been awake something like 35, 38, 39 hours, and now I'm getting in a rented car and driving on the freeways of Los Angeles for 2 to 3 hours. That's madness. I will not do that anymore. I hope you enjoy these brain myths and facts. If so, please let me know in the comments box below, and I'll do another one soon. In the meantime, please watch our video on how stress impacts your decision-making brain. I'll put the link to this video in the comment box below, or you can find it under our playlist titled Tips on Improving Decision-Making Skills. Lastly, if you haven't done so, please hit the subscribe button below, as I'll be adding more video content in the weeks to come. Best wishes for continued success. Until next time, I'm Stephen Howard.